Political analyst Dr. Ongama Mtimka joins us now for further scrutiny. Doctor, looking forward to this. I mean, I've got so many questions. Let's first hear your opinion on the postponement of this budget speech, a first time ever since the dawn of democracy. The president said it's because the finance minister had to go to extremes to find money. The deputy president yesterday says that it was the ANC that halted the budget and will table a more people-focused or friendly budget, while the finance minister, well, you heard his excuses, but then who did the minister consult with before compiling his budget? What's going on?
I think, good afternoon to you and the listener, your viewers. So I think the one thing that's important here is that this deadlock is good from the perspective of conveying a message about the efficacy of the GNU. Remember that especially for the DA and other opposition parties, an impression had been created after the series of losses on the Bella bill, on the signing of the expropriation bill, among others, the MHI also, that they were losing. So that they've been able to veto a process bodes well for perceptions among stakeholders of the Democratic Alliance in particular, and others, to say they still have a firm voice in the process. Now, the interesting thing is that deadlocks by their nature are very disturbing, can be very disturbing. We've seen it in the US, for example, where the politics there result in failures to allocate, approve budgets or increases in deficits, and as a result of that, public services are affected. Likewise, it's going to be the first time in history that departments would have hardly a month available for them to make adjustments to allocations that would have been made, which they would hear about only around the second week of March, hardly a few days before the financial year has to start. So that's how bad, deadlocks can be. But from an accountability point of view, they are serving a good purpose. It's a good reason why the budget was postponed. My hope is that between the fights about sources of income, or with the DA on one hand pushing for rapid, concessions as far as ports and other infrastructure are concerned as sources of this revenue, and the ANC that wants to find either some taxes or, in fact, running a budget deficit, that they'll be able to find each other within this next few days. We cannot create a situation where government makes huge decisions with a gun on the state's head. It's not a best situation to be in, to have to, for example, make a decision about port concessions, when you have a crisis against which you are trying to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, Doctor, we won't even entertain the reactions from political parties. I mean, I want to know, if we do not have the reserves to borrow, and of course are currently, and are almost out of money, who do we then hold responsible, right? The Auditor General reported an 11 billion rand irregular or fruitless expenditure. Where is this money? When is it being recovered? And most of this debt has been written off. So where's the money from investments that were seemingly coming into the country, and also money that was reportedly recovered from state capture?
Yeah, so that's a big question. The other thing is that there are economists, like Duma Gqubule, among others, who argue that actually running an expansionary fiscal policy through a budget deficit is a growth-enabling thing, which should not be, tried to be avoided, because then you stimulate the economy by running a budget deficit, as long as there's follow through as far as, whatever expenditure the state is funding is geared towards economic growth. And that, as you say, the loopholes that are there that create corruption and wasteful and fruitless expenditure are closed. But the challenge in South Africa is that the taxpayer is the least feared stakeholder, the individual taxpayers. Other sources of potential income are industries, and I mean the mining sector, in terms of the decline of sources of tax from that sector, or the corporate sector in general, where our tax rates are at about 28%, and where we fear that if we increase those, you've got a global, a neoliberal system that would actually punish South Africa for targeting the corporate sector. But there's a lot to be said about South Africa's corporate sector that is very prone to cutting corners when it comes to paying tax, instead of targeting the average consumer, as the first port of call.
We have a huge cabinet, Doctor, and of course, we've just had the announcement of the increase in the public minimum wage, in the public servants minimum wage as well. So the 12th of March is fast approaching. What should we ready ourselves for as rate as well as taxpayers, as it sounds like we will be forced to pay this 2% in some other ways?
Look, for me, I'm not among the people who complain about either the bloatedness of the civil service or, in fact, even the cabinet. The fact of the matter is that cabinet is our price, the price that we pay for political stability. And that's how presidents have actually managed to create enough stability for themselves internally in their parties, since President Zuma and President Ramaphosa, especially under the government of national unity. That's the price for stability, because these people who are in those cabinet positions are power wielders who, when sidelined, would be a source of instability. So that's the price we have to pay. Then when it comes to the civil service itself, we see high vacancy rates in the core, departments that are responsible for service delivery in the country. Our biggest problem is leadership for economic growth. We do need our government to be a lot more focused on competent leadership at the level of the political executive leaders and directors general, who are able to apply themselves to how to grow and enable growth in each of the economic sectors of South Africa.
Doctor, you're very diplomatic there. Thank you so much for your input this afternoon. Dr. Ongama Mtimka is a political analyst there with some analysis on the country's budget.